We are really looking forward to this conversation today. We're going to be talking again about accessory dwelling units, also known as ADUs. I'm going to be hosting and moderating the conversation, which is Build It Green's 7th and final fall forum event on owning and renting ADUs. My name is Renee Champ, and I'm the director of the nonprofit Napa Sonoma ADU Center. And I also live in an ADU myself. I'll talk a little bit more about that later this afternoon. The mission of our organization, the Napa Sonoma ADU Center, is to help homeowners build ADUs. Napa Sonoma ADU is a fiscally sponsored project of Napa Valley Community Foundation with support from Community Foundation Sonoma County, as well as the cities of Napa and Calistoga and the County of Napa. Napa Sonoma ADU focuses on supporting homeowners to build ADUs in Napa and Sonoma counties through collaboration with local jurisdictions, nonprofits, and the private sector, with a goal of increasing housing affordability in our community. One reason that we're passionate about ADUs is they're so flexible. Homeowners often say opportunities to keep their family together and to build wealth is some of their primary reasons for building ADUs on their property. And some homeowners see ADUs as a source of rental income in the near term and a downsizing opportunity in the future that would allow them to rent out the primary dwelling for retirement income. With a lot of folks still displaced from wildfires and still more hard hit by the economic and health implications of COVID-19, we think that building and renting an ADU is not only a smart way for homeowners to invest in their own future, it's also a community service. So for all those reasons and more, we're excited about speaking with you all this afternoon about the promise and potential of ADUs as an important part of the overall response to meeting our local housing needs, and specifically diving into a conversation about owning and renting an ADU. Through Build It Green's series, we've been exploring the role that ADUs can play in realizing a healthy housing ecosystem. This is even more important than ever given today's context of COVID, as I mentioned, the housing and climate crises and social inequalities throughout. The beauty of ADUs is that they're made by the community, they exist within the community, and they also raise interesting questions of shared space, small-scale building challenges, homeowners as developers, and the tenant experience as well. Our conversation today is all about the people who own and live in these small homes, the impact that they've had on their lives, and the barriers and opportunities that are still present. Today, we have a wonderful group of panelists who know ADUs and the intimate connections, hopes, fears, and opportunities that these small homes offer our community. Each one brings a unique perspective through their experiences with accessory dwelling units. So first, I'd love to introduce Lenoir McDonald. She's of the Center for Elders Independence, whose mission is to provide an innovative model of healthcare and medical services for frail, low-income seniors that empowers seniors to live independently. Lenoir has been renting an ADU from her work colleague and shares both her journey of finding her home and her experiences as a tenant. Alicia Chikanova of Home Whip, a concierge home service company founded to improve communication between builders and homeowners through a more efficient and transparent process. Alicia was inspired to become an ADU specialist after helping a client build an ADU. And finally, we have Lark Farrell of the City of Napa. As housing manager of the City of Napa, Lark has researched and designed affordable housing programs that utilize home shares and also ADU home builder incentives. Her department and partners have experience with the intermediary steps sometimes needed to match homeowners with renters. So thank all of you for taking the time to speak with us today, and thank you again to our audience for sharing a part of your afternoon with us. I know through experience that there are quite a few steps in the process to build an ADU. There's working with the building and permit departments, including numerous building inspections. There's state building code and new changes to city ADU rules to navigate thanks to the new state laws that went into effect in January 2020. Not to mention financing, finding vendors, the design of the ADU, and so much more. So let's start with you, Alicia. Can you walk us through what you went through helping your first ADU client with your company Home Whip, the gaps that you worked to solve, and what still is needed to streamline the process for both homeowners and builders?
Thank you, Renee, but that's quite a lot of questions. Let's start small. I did indeed face a client who wanted to build an EDU, who had a very complicated situation at home with her mother's health deteriorating, and she was thinking of a solution that will be flexible enough to be able to rent it out or even to host a caregiver there as a solution for taking care of her mom. And the way she presented this solution to me was a contract that said, we will build you an ADU for the cost of 150,000 to 250,000. And she was about to sign that contract. I was looking at her, this is a $100,000 range of unknowns. You cannot sign this contract. And what my company does, we're actually working with clients about scope of work, which is the most important thing in construction, because I compare it to baking. It's like, let's bake a cake. We don't know the ingredients, but we'll bake one. So that's why I'm so big on scope, but I'm also big on visualizing it. And it gives another example with the same client. She was thinking, oh, I definitely need a double bed there. And the space is tiny. It's less than 300 square feet. So I'm showing the visual to her and go like, if you put a bed here, there will be no way you can put a table for breakfast. So we ended up putting in a Murphy bed. So that's how I got into the ADU space in the first place, and got myself an ADU special certificate, because I was curious, and I was also inspired, the same as you all are here, that it's such a flexible solution. That it's amazing how, especially this year, how much flexibility it gives families to face whatever life throws in their direction. And I'm always afraid of the word streamlining, because even when we are talking about the small unit, it's still a construction project, especially if we're talking about a detached unit. And it's a mistake to think that, oh, let's just plug a modular unit in here. It still needs all the utilities, all the foundation work. It has to be connected to the main house landscape-wise. So I don't want to oversimplify things. And that's why our checklist is actually at least 30 questions to get the conversation rolling. So that's what we do when we start discussing ADUs with our clients. And to end a bit on where the main challenges are right now, I think actual information about ADUs in general is one of the big ones. And it saddens me to think, to hear actual stories about architects refusing the job because they were not sure how the ADU thing was planning out. And doing events like this, I think it's very helpful, and helpful to everyone, both professionals and homeowners.
That's really helpful, Alicia. Thank you so much. And I couldn't agree more about setting expectations about streamlining and the reality of the complexity of the project from day one. That's wonderful. So as we've heard from Alicia, building an ADU, and as many of us know, involves a lot of steps, and ADUs are commonly built by first-time home builders who will assume it'll be a more straightforward process than it turns out to be. A little bit about what my nonprofit does actually to help homeowners through that process. We help folks at Napa-Sonoma ADU Center with education and resources to help them catalyze the process. So we have tools on our website at www.napasonomaadu.org, like an ADU calculator tool to help folks understand upfront the reality of the cost of the ADU, a lookup tool to identify if they're eligible to build one. Usually now the answer is yes. We do a ton of ADU webinars like this one and others through our organization and in partnership with local planning and building divisions. And then we also provide high-level technical assistance and problem solving. We do one-on-one consultations where we'll do a site visit with a homeowner, talk about their goals in building an ADU, and provide them with a customized report afterwards to help them understand what the next steps are on the project, what their local ADU rules are, and the type of professional team that they should put together. having someone that does the amazing work that Alicia does, I think is really wonderful. It really helps you get through that process because there are, as we know, so many moving pieces. And we've found since our launch as a new nonprofit in April that there's a lot of homeowners who are adult children who want to create a home for an aging parent, seniors who want to downsize into an ADU and rent their primary residence for rental income so that they can better afford to age in place, middle-class homeowners who want to build an ADU for the rental income to help cover the cost of their monthly mortgage payment, wealthier homeowners who want to help create a home for a local teacher, a restaurant worker, or another individual who otherwise couldn't afford to live in the greater Bay Area, and so many more. And with that, I'd love to hear from you, Lark. I know that the City of Napa has created some innovative products to help lower the barriers to affordable housing through encouraging homeowners in Napa to build junior units, including both junior ADUs and interior conversions. And for those who don't know, junior ADUs are additions to a home that are attached to the main house. They're part of the interior of the house or an attached garage. They have basic kitchen appliances and a bathroom that can also be shared with the primary residence, and an exterior entrance. So can you tell us a little bit about your junior unit program, how the city is making it more financially feasible for homeowners to contribute below market rate housing to help the city meet its affordable housing goals?
Sure, Renee, thank you. So in the city of Napa, affordable housing, probably like most places in California, has been a really high priority for us. And we can't build out because of our ag preserve. There's not a lot of easy sites left. So we looked at options, and ADUs seemed like a pretty good way to go about creating affordable housing in our community. So what I created, it was actually right before the fires in 2017, which ended up being a terrible time to launch an ADU program, but is we have a program where, similar to our housing rehab loan program, which provides technical assistance, is we go to homeowners who want to create a junior unit by carving out a unit within their house or have an accessory structure that they want to create an ADU from. And we provide them with technical assistance to develop the scope. We have a grant for them to get a designer to help design the space for them. And then we provide forgivable financing for every year they agree to make one of the units, either the primary unit or the new unit, an affordable rental unit for a low-income tenant. And so through that process, we've realized that it's not always as easy as just, like, let's build an ADU, here's some money, let's go do it. I mean, it was very educational for me launching this program to realize how much streamlining we really needed in our city, who was pro ADUs. And so we worked on trying to simplify that. At the same time, the state was passing regulations that required some streamlining. We were actually a little ahead of that. And just a little plug for Renee and her ADU center is we were finding a lot of interest from people, not necessarily everyone wanted to go through our program. Some people wanted to build the traditional granny unit, for example, or weren't interested in doing an affordable rental unit. So we really saw the benefit of partnering with the ADU Center and getting that launched. And I'm sure Renee will go into more detail about the services they provide. One of the other things we realized is that these homeowners who are becoming landlords for the first time don't necessarily know the ins and outs of property management. So luckily, we had started partnering with a nonprofit here in Napa, Napa Valley Community Foundation, or Napa Valley Community Housing, to fund a home sharing program where they match up home providers with home seekers. So they agreed to provide that same service to our ADU participants, to the homeowners who are building ADUs. So if they wanted to, but they're not required to, they can go through this service for free and find pre-screened tenants, and there's mediation services. So we felt like that was a good way for them to ease into being a property manager, especially with somebody right under their roof in some cases, to have somebody to help them guide through that process. So we've been kind of slow going with, like I said, with the fires and everything, but we've actually completed 4 ADUs and have 3 under construction right now, and 3 that are in the bid process, and about 5 going through the design process. The COVID situation hit and hit our funding source, which was our general fund. So we're now looking at some state funding. So that way we can keep going, maybe on a little bit smaller scale, but I think ADUs really make a lot of sense in Napa. And so we're in it for the long haul.
Thank you so much for sharing about that program, Lark. And working with multiple cities, I have to say, I really hope that other jurisdictions throughout the state hear about the wonderful Junior Unit Initiative program that the city of Napa has developed. It's so innovative. It's so unique. I want it to be less unique. I want it to exist in even more cities. And I know there are other cities in the state that are doing wonderful work like that. And I'm so glad that you're sharing about it to inspire still more. So Lenoir, I want to hear from you. Why were you looking for an ADU? How did you find one? And what has your renting experience been like?
Happy to share. First of all, I love living in an ADU. And I, as much as I felt that I was very fortunate and lucky, and I still do, it was much of a kind of a happy circumstance that this whole thing happened. My colleague, and we both work at a senior healthcare program. We understand, how important it is for older folks to have secure housing, and as such, we understand too and see, especially in Oakland, an awful lot of people in these high rent areas in the Bay Area, especially, are very vulnerable to rent increases. Oftentimes. A couple, for instance, one will fall and will lose their job or whatever, and all of a sudden everybody's out of a house, and so it's a rather precarious situation. And I was fortunate that I had spoken to Alexis, my landlady, who is also a colleague, and had mentioned my concerns as I'm looking at retiring next year. That there might be, I was concerned that I'd be able to stay in Oakland as when I didn't have an income coming in at the same level. And so she approached me a couple of months later and said that they had a unit in their home and they would welcome me to come and entertain the idea of moving in. And I had moved 4 times in 5 years, so I was not particularly interested in boxing everything I owned up again and doing that, but I did, and I have never looked back. This house happens to be, they were actually able to build the unit into the house when they were doing a complete renovation of the home. And it was originally intended for Alexis's mother, who didn't have any interest in moving into the home. So, just as I moved in, COVID hit. And as somebody who is over the age of 60, I had to quarantine, especially last March and April when this first came down. And it was absolutely wonderful that, we became a pod before pods were actually defined, but, that we all sheltered and were very careful. Her kids, she's got 2 kids, a 16-year-old and a 10-year-old, who showed up and knocked on my door when they were going to the store and let me know ahead of time that they were going. So they got my groceries for me and all. So there's been a nice support system there. And it's not an apartment. I guess that's the best part for me. It's a home. And it feels that way, with a driveway and, a front yard and, soccer balls hanging out in the corner of the garden and this and that. And we recently just got a dog to share. None of us, all of us still work. Alexis and her husband are in their 40s. They both work from home and the kids do too, but they travel a lot. Sarah Vannon's Indian. They take big, long trips. And so we were concerned about having a dog, but now that I'm there, I'm the backup. And when I go out of town, they know that they can, the dog's going to be taken care of too. I do. We also have chickens and ducks, fresh eggs. I mean, it's really something I never would have been able to live in a place like this, on my own. And how do we find it? In senior services, we work, the Covia Foundation has a program where they, as I think Lark was talking about, a supported system where if you're looking for a home to share or someplace to move in, oftentimes in our situation, the ones we know about, it's an older person who's got too much house. and they don't want to leave because this is where they, you know, their friends are, and that's where their kids are, maybe. But they need maybe some assistance. You know, maybe they need somebody to go to the store for them, or to help them get up the stairs, or just with assistance at home. And so there's a trade-off there, and it might be a student that moves in, or it might be another senior who's also kind of displaced and looking for a place to live. So that's a popular model, but it is slow going there too. You know, there are not, I think in the 2 years I've known about the program, maybe 25 people, 30 people have been successfully matched. And there's a lot of ongoing support that requires as well. Good communication, setting expectations and all. And I have that too, as much as I enjoy it, you know, and know Alexis and Sarah Vannon and the kids pretty well. You know, their backyard is a fishbowl right into their living room and their kitchen. So, you know, I don't just wander back there. You know, I usually send a text first if I'm going to come by or need help or get locked out or whatever. So, you know, I have to be respectful of that, but it's just really been great, I have to say. They were also very careful when they built this unit to make sure it was super soundproof, that, you know, they didn't want to hear what I was doing, and, you know, I don't necessarily want to hear what they're doing either. So it's well built as an accessory dwelling unit. I have my own entrance and all. There's really no shared space except the front yard where the egress. And
Lenore, I love the illustration of your experience. It's so helpful to hear that concrete example and to think about the nuance of the intangible benefits and how you navigate the privacy questions and things like that. That's really wonderful, and especially during COVID. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm. And may I piggyback actually on that picture of co-living in that shared space, because I would like to add one more variable there, and that variable is a neighbor. And I will encourage everyone to involve neighbors when they're planning the ADUs so that they are on board. It's not required, but it's advisable because it's just good neighborly behavior, if you will. And it will also avoid misunderstanding down the road when you are starting to build, and when the issue is like, how does the tenant comes through to the main unit, to the accessory unit? How do they get there? If they go by night, do we have a lit path there? And these are the sort of questions that are best thought about when you're just starting, so that you don't have to scramble and do something stupid in the backyard that will be, you know, like an eyesore down the road again.
That's such a great point, Alicia. And I'll also add, because I know a lot of folks get a little anxious about neighbors sometimes, or having conflict. And one of the big concerns homeowners cite to us is scrutiny from the planning and permitting department when they build an ADU. So I will also say reassurance that thanks to the new state laws, the ADU permitting process is now a ministerial approval. And the permitting department is supposed to approve a permit that's full and complete within 60 days. And so there won't be any kind of public hearing or anything like that you need to be worried about. With that said, I couldn't agree more about the open communication with neighbors. To that end, Alicia, do you want to share a little bit about your client's experience with finding tenants, if you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, I would echo what Lenore was saying, because I think a lot of it comes from your own personal network, and that's where you feel more comfortable. And also, let's not underestimate what Airbnb was doing, right, before COVID hit, because I think a lot of people who are thinking about it, they all actually have some Airbnb experience, so they know what to kind of prepare themselves for. That said, I would encourage everyone who is doing it for the first time to take a property management course, just to be better educated and feel more confident. It's not expensive. I think last time I checked, it was around $100, but it will definitely pay back big time.
That's really helpful. I love that, Alicia. Thank you. And actually, I should note that our organization is exploring a tenant placement program that we're hoping to roll out in the new year up in Napa and Sonoma County specifically. The goal is for ADU homeowners who enroll in the program to agree to rent their ADU for a year at least at lower rate to tenants who are at 65% area median income and below. And in exchange, they would receive assistance with tenant placement and things like that. And also have a helpline so that they have help with the property, understanding the property management piece. So I couldn't agree more about the importance of getting that support. It can be quite a new experience for folks who haven't been a landlord before, but I think with the right support and education, it can be a really positive one. To that end, I'll actually share a little bit about my personal experience as someone who lives in an accessory dwelling unit. I live in a 720 square foot above garage ADU owned by my 77-year-old mother out in Sonoma County. She's actually a retired public school teacher, and the rent that my husband and I pay to her makes it possible for her to afford to age in place and remain on her property here. And kind of similar to what Lenore was talking about, our actual multi-generational living arrangement allows us to be close to family during COVID. We run errands for my mom, help out with the property. It's a couple acres out in the country. And in the future, she's also going to be able to help us with childcare support. And those benefits that I've experienced have been reflected by a lot of the homeowners I've spoken with at the Napa Sonoma ADU Center and expanded beyond the family unit as well. Some homeowners are anxious about the tensions that can arise with multi-generational living arrangements like ours between family members living in such close proximity, and others might be worried about safety or privacy when they're renting an ADU to a stranger on another hand. In all of those cases, I found that the best solution to overcome those tensions is to do kind of set expectations in advance, sometimes even writing out your expectations. My mom and I are big fans of open and transparent communication up front. So we actually sat down with a mediator to discuss and write out what our expectations, fears, and hopes were about living on the same property after I'd been, doing my adult life on the other side of the country for over a decade. And similarly, as a landlord, we recommend that folks have a clear lease agreement that lays out the guidelines and expectations for your tenant. And we find that landlords are often comfortable with a new tenant once they've conducted adequate screening and interviewed the individual. So one of the reasons our organization is so excited about ADUs is because they provide such a unique and special way of building community, just as we've heard from our panelists. And whether it's for the greater community good, or if it's to build your own communal support network, such as by providing housing for a family member or friend, or creating an arrangement with a tenant that includes intangible benefits, such as shared property work or looking after each other's kids or pets, there can be a lot of helpful benefits. So I'd love to hear a little more from Lark and then Lenore about what are some of the wider benefits that you have seen within the communities that you're in. What are some of the benefits you see happening either in your own experience or that you envision happening as ADU adoption continues to grow? So Lark, I don't know if you'd like to start.
Sure. So as I mentioned, with Napa having an ag preserve, this is a great way for us to more easily and quickly create affordable housing, especially with the RENA numbers the state is saying we need to generate. There's a big need for affordable housing. It's much easier than trying to get a 70, 100 unit apartment building, affordable housing project built in our community where neighbors may have big concerns about that. It's smaller scale, it's easier to go in, even though it is complicated, it's much easier than a big scale project. One of the things I really like about this is, you touched on, Renee, is that it allows people to age in place. One of our participants, the daughter lives in Georgia and her mother lives in Napa, and this is allowing her to feel like her mother can stay in her home and be self-sufficient by having a tenant there. So there's somebody nearby and also helping with the, bringing in some revenue to her mother to help her to maintain the home. It also builds social connections. I love the idea of the pod. That's kind of what we envisioned even pre-COVID was having this social connection where there was somebody there. It wasn't just the person rattling around in the big house by themselves, you know, that they had somebody there and some connections. And we also, I really like the idea that the community can be part of the solution. And that's actually another one of our participants, our very first participant. That's what she said. She wanted to be enrolled in our program because she could be part of the solution to the affordable housing crisis we were having in Napa. And I just love that. It also allows us to create units close to jobs, so we don't have as many people commuting out. I mean, there's just so much to be said. And separate from our program, I really love the concept of intergenerational housing. It's something I wanted to explore as well through maybe not this program, but maybe a slightly different program where we can encourage families who in the past, maybe the families were having the grandkids living out in another county where it was cheaper and the grandmother or grandfather was by themselves, getting that connection back. And I think ADUs are a wonderful way to do that.
I couldn't agree more, Lark. Thank you for sharing all of that. And it's so wonderful to hear from a city perspective, the thoughtfulness about the building community and the role that individuals can play along with our city government in doing that. Lenore, any extra thoughts that you want to share on the topic?
Yeah, for sure. We've been very active with community kind of grassroots efforts to make our communities more friendly for seniors. This is probably not news to a lot of people in the development world, but the fastest growing demographic in the country is 85 and older, and then the most vulnerable people right now to COVID, but especially to homelessness. More than over half of the newly homeless people of a year or less are over the age of 55, and many have health issues. So there's a lot of vulnerable people out there. But the Age-Friendly Network, which is a very positive thing that started with the World Health Organization for first world nations after the World Wars, noticing that about 25 years ago that the population was getting older. And in all of these countries, in the US especially, and AARP picked up that banner and have been helping communities organize under this rubric of the World Health Organization. And housing is a huge one. Where are we going to live as we get older and our kids are gone and we don't have an income anymore? And so there's been some very creative things that have been done there. And I've worked in Marin County. I was on the Commission of Aging there, and we actually conducted an inventory of all of the different options for seniors where they could live in the community assisted living. It's hard to get a handle on the ADUs necessarily outside of permits that have been pulled, but did a stock, and we provided that, for instance, to the county supervisors and to the city managers, so that when they were doing their budgeting, they had some information to back up, what the needs were. So that's been very important. And then there was legislation passed. I do a lot of advocacy for senior issues in my role here at CEI, and their Assembly Member Mark Levine got AB 2021, I think, is passed a couple of years ago, so that cities can waive some of the development fees that a senior, especially if you're a senior and you want to take action with an ADU, that you would have to pay. So they're not automatically, a city would have to opt to do that. But Marin, I know, this is $12,000, so it's not chump change and it's very encouraging, of course, too. And I think Alicia mentioned it. Very important to talk to the neighbors that you're doing this. I park on the street, for instance. In some places, those spaces are like gold, right? And if there's a car parked there all the time, and I'm working from home, somebody would, conceivably be have some angst about that. But it's such a creative way to do it. I think AARP has put a lot of information in there. They're the huge lobbying group. As soon as you turn to 40, you start getting their publications and emails. But the work that they've done, I think, is very important in advocating for housing. And there's a lot of great information encouraging seniors to do this, to look at ways to stay home. So go for it. I can't encourage it enough. And when my little guy, Nikhil, it tells me he's going to the store, I always have a list. I don't care, even if I don't need it. There's nothing more gratifying than having this young man show up at my door with a big smile on his face, helping me get my groceries. His mom assures me it means a lot to him too. So.
I love that so much, Lenore. And yes, I'm so glad you brought up the AARP. They've done some incredible work around accessory dwelling units. You all can Google it if you're curious. They have some helpful videos and online resources and guides. Definitely recommend checking those out.
Definitely.
Thank you all so much. And we have been getting some wonderful questions coming in from the audience. And so if you haven't yet entered a question and you want to, go ahead and do that now. And we're going to dive into answering as many of the questions as possible that we've gotten so far. If we don't get to your question, we will circle back to you to the extent possible to follow up after the webinar. And with that, let's go ahead and get it started. And I see our colleagues at Build It Green have shared in the chat for all of you some information about the AARP. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. Our first question is for Alicia. I'm hoping, Alicia, can you explain how one gets an ADU specialist certificate? Oh, you're muted, Alicia.
Good point. Thank you, Rena. The go-to resource for anything ADU related in this country is actually called Patterson and his ADU Academy. They do this certification through the Earth Advantage. But that said, it depends who is asking this question, because there is a specific certification for real estate agents. And there is also a specific certification for appraisers. So depending on who you are and what your needs are, my answer would vary. But let's leave it at that. You can start with Earth Advantage, and then I'll leave my email right now. If you have any more questions, I can answer them offline.
Amazing, Alicia. And if you don't mind actually chatting to attendees, if you're open, share your email, that would be excellent. Same goes to Lark and Lenore if you're open to it, and I'll share mine in a minute as well. Thank you, Alicia. The next question is for me. Are the tools you mentioned that your nonprofit, the Napa Sonoma ADU Center, has just for Napa ADUs or anywhere in California? Great question. So our nonprofit organization is focused on serving folks in Napa and Sonoma counties. So our tools are geared towards Napa and Sonoma counties. With that said, if there isn't a similar resource in your community, they can be helpful, but I would actually direct you to the statewide CASITA Coalition. They have a website that actually has a lot of helpful kind of statewide information. If you do go to our website, www.napasonomaadu.org, there's an ADU calculator tool on there. It is focused on algorithms that are specific to likely costs for ADUs in Napa and Sonoma counties, where it depends on where you are in the state, whether or not that's going to be more or less expensive. It definitely errs on the more expensive statewide. But our ADU workbook, again, is geared towards Napa and Sonoma County, but has a really helpful process overview and tips that would be useful to anyone. But again, check out CASITA Coalition. They're also really helpful and geared statewide. All right, our next question is for Lenore. Lenore, how does living in an ADU compare with living in an assisted living facility?
Well, let me see. I haven't lived in an assisted living facility, so I can only guess. I mean, I think that one thing that I appreciate about where I am is that my owners set the price for me for rent. Understanding that they wanted to be committed to keeping older adults in the community and not having to move. So I pay a flat rate of $2,000 a month, and it includes, and it's going to be $2,000 a month for as long as I live there. So that's a huge benefit for me to be able to plan out as you look at spending down, your retirement income and how that's going to be. It's enormous for me to be able to predict long term what my my rental fees are going to be. And it includes internet, and the only thing I would have to pay for is my phone and cable if I wanted it. But we just stream together. But in assisted living, I would say that I think one of the big advantages to assisted living is that there are social activities, there's common space and common areas that it would be easy for me to isolate in my unit if I didn't have somewhat of a relationship with my family. So I think that might be one point to take under consideration, and just how much socializing, how much help do you need? Oftentimes assisted living places will also have a kind of advancing in terms of what your needs are. As you need more help, you might move into a different area of the complex or the community where you get more help. But they provide transportation and activities and things as well. So, and there might be some ownership in interest there too. I think you can actually buy into a unit in assisted living communities. Mine is not. There's no ownership opportunity where I am. So, but I do think that you touched upon one thing, and the lease piece is really important, especially during COVID. If you don't have a good agreement in place, it's hard to get rid of somebody if they're older, or anybody right now with COVID restrictions and rent controls are very strict in place. You could be stuck with somebody for a long time if it isn't working out. So just a little precaution there. I do know a couple of people that's happened to.
That's so helpful, Lenore.
Yeah, and I see that question. My ADU is small. It's good for one person. I don't think, I think mine's about as large as yours, Renee. It's on 2 stories. So it was the garage, and they just kicked up the ceilings and made them taller. And so to come up with the rest of the house when they put a 2nd story on it. So my kitchen and bathroom and living room are upstairs, and my bedroom and a separate den kind of area and washer and dryer and stuff are on the 1st floor.
Great. So you have a 2-story ADU, and an average garage is about 400 square feet, I think. And so if that's doubled, sounds like a little under 800, same as mine is a 720 square feet. So the next question, I was going to add as well, if folks are interested in learning about assisted living facilities, Lenore is the big expert here, but I don't know if you all have heard of the book Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. It talks about the history of the assisted living facilities. It is such an incredible book. I highly recommend it. Getting off topic, but all right, next question. This question could go to anyone. How do renters typically find ADUs if they don't know the owner? I guess I could start with, there's some helpful Facebook groups that are place-based. So like in Sonoma County, for example, there's a Facebook group where if you're looking for a rental, you can go there, and both potential landlords and tenants, especially when it's a home share situation or an ADU type situation, might go there. And then of course there's also Craigslist. But do folks have other thoughts that they would chime in?
Well, I would encourage folks to ask their network of friends and family. Those are sometimes the best resources. So we encourage our participants to do that, as well as using Next Door Neighbor or the resources such as what you mentioned, Renee, or through the home sharing program.
Thank you for that, Lark.
And Nextdoor is good too. That's, especially since COVID, that's really taken off in terms of neighbors, and who live right near you. And some of those neighborhood areas, like in Oakland, they're very targeted. So somebody's looking for somebody for their son or daughter is coming back, or whatever, you can post it up there. Some small shelter of comfort there, knowing they live nearby you.
That's great. And if you're a senior looking as well, maybe your local senior center, other kind of community resource hubs. Wonderful. Next question, Alicia, can you please specify what property management courses you recommend?
I tried to Google to find it in my box quickly, but I couldn't. So if someone can just email me, I'll try to find them later on.
Wonderful. Lenore, Do you know what kind of soundproofing was used in your ADU?
I don't know, but it's effective. I don't hear anything. I really don't hear anything. So I don't know. But again, the unit was built, when they were doing this whole remodel. So, so it wasn't an add-on. So that might have made a difference, but it's very effective.
Does anyone else have thoughts on that?
Yeah.
I don't know the exact material, but that is one of the standard things that we have added within our scope of our program is insulation, soundproofing.
That's great. That'll be a good question for builders and contractors. So our next question, how big does your property have to be before you can qualify for an ADU? And does it vary from county to county? I'm so glad that you asked because this has changed significantly as of January 2020 with this flurry of new state laws. And the state laws govern what the local jurisdictions do when it comes to their rules. But the local jurisdictions, and by jurisdiction, I mean either the city, if you're in the city limits, or the unincorporated county, if you're outside city limits, they have all their own specific, unique, and special ADU rules that have to conform to those overarching state laws. So as of January 2020, thanks to the new state laws, ADUs can now generally be built on any lot with an existing or proposed single family or multifamily building in a residential or mixed use zone, regardless of the lot size. And I should also make sure to mention that both a detached ADU and an interior junior ADU can be built on a single family lot. So there are some restrictions that might restrict ADUs, like if you're in a water deficient zone, or if there's a septic issue or setbacks can constrain it. But generally speaking, a lot of folks now, thanks to the new state laws, are going to be able to build an ADU and junior ADU. So good question. And yes, so it varies depending on every city and county, but all of them have to adhere to that new state law. So we have a question on solar panels. Are they required for a regular or junior ADU per building code? Lark, do you want to chime in? Yeah, okay. So or Alicia, do you have a thought on that you wanted to chime in?
The solar panels are required for new construction. So if we're looking at detached ADU, then it will be required with some deviation when it is a manufactured unit. If it is a junior ADU, and I think it's important to mention, the junior ADU, it's a conversion. It's not a newly built unit. So it's converted out of the existing square footage. They do not require, if the main house doesn't have it, then junior or attached unit does not require it as well.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Alicia. Any thoughts on prefab ADUs from any of you, perhaps Alicia? And are there any resources that can help guide homeowners on what to look for when looking at different prefab companies, since it seems like there's a lot of new prefab startups coming up? And I'm happy to chime in on that as well, but I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts.
I think there is a lot of variation within this word prefab ADU, and they start from how it is manufactured. Is it just panelized wall? Is it just a whole unit? Is it a container unit? Or is it a 3D unit? So it's a whole kind of country of construction vocabulary, which I don't think an average homeowner even wants to go in. What they do need to know is what is the purpose of the ADU. I think that's the main reason. How it's built is secondary to this question. Because, for example, if you're building it for your older parent, you might have a fancy unit made by some fancy prefab manufacturer, but if they don't build it with wide enough doorways and curb-free shower, then it's not a good solution for you. And Renee, I'll leave it to you to fill in the gaps.
That's fantastic, Alicia. And I think this is such an important question because, as the question asker raised, there are so many new prefab companies popping up, in large part thanks to the new state laws that have made it a lot easier to build ADUs, which is great. And what I would say is a couple things. Number one, a lot of folks automatically think that a prefab unit is going to be more affordable than a stick build. And what we have found is that for the quality of prefab unit that we recommend a homeowner build, it's actually not going to be a big cost difference between a stick build and a prefab unit. A couple reasons for that is you still have to do things like a foundation and all of that, the permitting, and also you have to transport it to the location. And sometimes you have to pay for a crane to crane it into your yard. So there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't always end up being significantly less expensive than a stick build. However, especially as we're seeing a labor shortage in the state of California, and in particular in regions with wildfires where there's rebuilds having to go on, and we don't have as much labor to do that stick build work, a prefab unit is most likely going to be time effective, right? And if it's time effective and it's built and up more rapidly than a stick build unit, then you can start renting it out sooner and start getting that return on investment earlier if you're building it to be a rental. So lots of things to consider. Our ADU workbook has a lot of details about different types of prefab units and things to think about that are relevant regardless of where you are in the state. So you can check out our ADU workbook and see that section on prefab. So much more to be said on the subject, but we are going to wrap up here in a minute. So we'll move on. For those of you who we didn't get to, I apologize. But thank you so much for your wonderful questions. And I just want to thank again the panelists and the audience for joining today. And also to Build It Green for putting this wonderful webinar together. If you have a minute, please post in chat what else you'd like to learn about ADUs or take our quick feedback survey. And with that, this concludes Build It Green's Fall Forum, but there are exciting programs coming down the pipeline. So please continue to engage with Build It Green's ADU programming by sending your questions and comments to hello@builditgreen.org. We also hope you can join our Regenerative Development Insights series. The second session is tomorrow. You can register today at builditgreen.org or at the link that we provided in the group chat. Let me tell you, I've watched some of that series. It's fascinating. I highly recommend it. We hope to see you there. And with that, thank you again to our wonderful panelists. Thank you to our audience and to Build It Green, and hope you all have a wonderful evening.